Welcome to today's deep dive. And we're going to be looking at this guy, Chris Butler.
Okay.
Who is the leader of this group called the Science of Identity Foundation.
Right.
But you may have also heard of the term CHRISCON.
Yes.
And that's a term that's used by some ex-members.
Uh-huh.
And as we go through all this material that we're going to be looking at today,
okay,
hopefully we'll get an understanding of why that term is used.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
So we've got a whole bunch of different types of materials today.
Okay.
Court documents, we've got articles, we've even got some like forum posts from ex-members.
Oh, wow.
And I guess the goal today is to try to figure out what Butler's life is all about.
Oh, okay.
What's the deal with his wealth?
Right.
And especially how all of that intersects with his claim to be a sannyasi Paramahamsa.
Right.
And I think for folks who aren't familiar with that term,
yeah,
sannyasi Paramahamsa, it implies that you've like renounced material things.
You've given it all up. Yeah.
And that just seems like such a paradox.
It really does. And I think the term CHRISCON itself sort of hints at some of the skepticism and controversy surrounding Butler, right? What's interesting is how his image as a renunciate spiritual leader, it clashes with the reality of his business empire.
Yeah.
Like he's connected to the down-to-earth health food chain in Hawaii, which is a super successful venture.
Right, yeah.
So it really does make you wonder, how does a renunciate amass such wealth?
Totally. And the sources that we have, they suggest that it wasn't just passive ownership.
Okay.
Ex-members allege that they were expected to tithe a significant portion of their income to Butler, and that many worked for little to no pay in SIF-related businesses.
Oh, wow.
And we even have one former member who described sleeping on money.
Really?
And receiving preferential treatment.
Huh.
So, I mean, it paints a very different picture from the simplicity one might associate with a
renunciate,
sannyasi Paramahamsa.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's the heart of the issue here, isn't it? This dissonance between the image and the alleged reality. Right. The title of sannyasi Paramahamsa carries so much weight in Hinduism.
Yes.
It suggests that someone has transcended all worldly desires, detached from material possessions.
Totally.
But then we see these claims of wealth accumulation, business involvement. So it makes you wonder.
It does.
What is the motivation behind cultivating this image of renunciation?
Like, what's the disconnect between what he's saying and what he's actually doing?
Yeah, exactly. Like, if Butler truly embraced a renunciate lifestyle, then why the emphasis on financial contributions and these business ventures?
It is a puzzle for sure.
It is. And one possible explanation is that this image of renunciation could be a way to attract followers and gain influence.
Oh, I see.
Because people are often drawn to spiritual leaders who appear to have transcended those worldly desires.
Right.
It creates an aura of authenticity.
Right.
Even holiness.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like if you present this image of purity and detachment, then that can make your teaching seem more profound.
Absolutely.
More believable.
More believable, exactly.
And then people are more willing to give money or time.
Yes. And that heightened trust and belief can translate into people's willingness to contribute financially or dedicate their time and labor to whatever the organization's ventures are.
So you have this public image of like a renunciate spiritual leader, but then behind the scenes there's this whole
this whole network of businesses,
a system that seems to prioritize getting money.
Right. It's a complex picture.
It really is.
And it raises these critical questions like, if Butler is genuinely living a life of renunciation, then these business dealings and these financial arrangements seem like a complete contradiction.
Right.
But it's also possible that he views these ventures as a means to support the organization's mission or spread his teachings.
Yeah, it's hard to know for sure.
It is. We haven't heard directly from him.
And it is important to remember that he hasn't publicly addressed any of this stuff.
That's true.
We're just looking at court documents and articles and accounts from former members.
Yeah.
But even with that said, that term CHRISCON that we were talking about, it seems to highlight this skepticism that some people have.
Definitely.
Like maybe things aren't as they seem.
Absolutely. And that skepticism is fueled by the seemingly contradictory nature of Butler's image and the allegations about the organization's practices.
Totally.
It's a dissonance that raises a lot of concerns about transparency and authenticity.
Yeah.
And it makes us wonder about the motivations behind this whole image of renunciation.
And speaking of contradictions, there's also this connection to QNet.
Right.
Which is a multi-level marketing company.
Yes.
And this is through one of SIF's prominent leaders.
Okay.
Alan Tibby or Caritas.
Right.
Now, multi-level marketing itself is a very controversial business model. It is, and Tibby was even accused of financial improprieties related to QNet in India.
Oh, wow.
So that connection to QNet further complicates things.
It really
It adds another layer of financial activity and potential for profit.
Yeah.
And given the allegations against Tibby, it makes you wonder about the ethical practices of the entire organization.
Right.
It makes you think, like, if the goal is really spiritual enlightenment and renunciation, then why get involved in these types of business ventures?
Exactly. Especially the ones that have drawn so much scrutiny for being potentially exploitative.
Yeah. It's a good question.
It is. And one that we can't really answer without getting Butler's perspective. But it definitely adds another layer to this paradox. The paradox of a renunciate leader.
Right.
Seemingly entangled in all these business ventures and financial activities.
It's like this tension between spiritual aspirations and worldly ambitions. And that tension is what's giving us all this mystery and intrigue.
Absolutely. And as we go further into this material, I'm sure we'll uncover even more layers to this story.
Oh, I bet.
This is fascinating.
Totally. So it's like we're dealing with these two separate narratives here.
Yeah.
On the one hand, you have Chris Butler as this spiritual leader advocating this simple life detached from material wealth.
Right.
But then on the other hand, we have these allegations of a complex business network, financial pressure on members, and even links to controversial business practices. Like, it's a lot to unpack.
It really is, and it's where things get fascinating, because it's not just about the money.
Right.
It's about the power dynamics at play.
Yeah.
When you have a charismatic leader, and he embodies this ideal of renunciation.
Yeah.
It creates a really strong sense of trust, devotion among followers.
And that trust can make people susceptible to certain requests or expectations, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Especially when they're framed as like
service to God or a path to spiritual growth.
Right. So the sources we have suggest that contributing to Butler's businesses or political ventures it wasn't seen as just like a financial transaction, but as a spiritual act.
Yes, a way to show your devotion and commitment.
Which adds another layer of complexity to this whole CHRISCON idea.
It does, because you're right. It suggests this system where financial contributions are all mixed up with spiritual seeking.
And how do you differentiate between genuine devotion and undue influence?
It's a good question.
When the leader has all the spiritual authority.
Yeah. It is a tough question. And it's made even more complicated when you think about the fact that a lot of these former members were really deeply committed to this organization.
Right.
They believed in Butler's teaching.
Right. They thought he's the real deal.
They saw him as a genuine spiritual guide. So their disillusionment speaks volumes.
It really does. It suggests that even within a context of like real belief and devotion.
Yes. There's potential for manipulation and abuse of power.
Absolutely.
One of the most unsettling examples of that potential abuse is the story of this boarding school in Baguio City, Philippines.
Right. This school was run by SIF, and it was modeled after these traditional Indian gurukulas, where students would live and learn under the guidance of a guru.
Okay.
But the thing is, Butler wasn't physically present.
That seems kind of important.
It does. In a traditional gurukula, you have direct interaction with the guru.
Right.
It's a personal connection that forms the foundation of that whole learning experience.
Right.
But here, the connection to Butler was mainly through recordings and photos.
I see. It creates a different dynamic then.
It does. And the accounts that we have from former students, like Ian Koviak and Rama Ranson, they paint a pretty bleak picture. They describe a rigid and controlling environment with harsh punishments and a pervasive sense of isolation.
Yeah, those stories are really sad. It makes you wonder what the long-term impact of that type of environment is, especially on young people.
Especially young people who are still developing their sense of self and their understanding of the world.
Totally. And it also makes you wonder about the ethical responsibilities of the adults in these communities. Sending kids far from home to a place with such strict rules and little contact with the outside world.
Yeah, that seems inherently risky.
He really does.
Yeah.
Especially when you think about the power dynamics.
Right.
These kids were sent by these devoted parents.
Yeah.
Who believe in Butler's teachings.
Right.
So there's inherent trust in the organization.
Right. They're trusting that their kids are going to be taken care of and guided toward the spiritual growth.
Right. But if what people are saying is true, that trust was misplaced.
And that's troubling, right?
Yeah.
It's like this system that's supposed to help these kids spiritually becomes a breeding ground for control and exploitation.
Right. It challenges how we think about what a spiritual community should be.
Exactly.
And it makes you think about how important critical thinking is.
Yes.
Even in a context of faith or devotion.
Absolutely.
Just because someone says they're a renunciate or a spiritual leader,
it
doesn't mean they're perfect.
It doesn't mean they're above reproach. You're right.
Right. And that's where discernment comes in.
Yes.
It's about not just looking at the surface.
Yeah.
Questioning your assumptions.
And being open to different perspectives.
And that's what we're trying to do here.
Exactly.
We're not trying to judge Butler or Sif.
Right.
We just want to look at the information that's out there.
And see if there are any inconsistencies or contradictions.
Exactly. And I think that's crucial because this isn't just about one man.
No.
Or one organization.
It's about power dynamics.
Right.
How they play out.
In any community.
In any community.
Especially one centered around a charismatic leader.
Exactly.
And that applies to way more than just spirituality.
Oh, absolutely. You see this in politics.
Yeah.
In business. Even in our personal relationships.
Right. Understanding those dynamics can help us make better choices.
Right.
And keep us safe from potential harm.
Absolutely. It's all about recognizing that blind faith in any context can be dangerous.
And that brings us to another part of this story that raises concerns about Butler's influence.
Yeah.
The involvement of the Gabbard family.
Right, Mike Gabbard.
Yeah.
A former senator for Hawaii. His wife, Carol, who served on the Board of Education.
Right.
And their daughter, Tulsi, a former U.S. representative.
Right.
They've all been linked to Sif.
And Mike Gabbard in particular has gotten some criticism for his stance on homosexuality.
Right.
Which some people say is because of Butler's teachings.
That's a really important point.
It is. It suggests that Butler's influence might go beyond just like personal stuff and financial stuff.
Right.
It could be affecting public policy and how society views certain things.
Right. It makes you think about transparency and accountability.
Yeah.
If a politician's views are being shaped by the teachings of this controversial leader, shouldn't voters know about that?
They should. It's about informed consent.
It is.
Yeah.
Voters have the right to know about the stuff that might be shaping their elected officials' decisions.
Right. And that brings us back to the purpose of all of this.
Yes.
Trying to understand who Chris Butler really is.
Right.
And what the Science of Identity Foundation is all about.
Is he a genuine spiritual leader?
Yeah.
Who's been misrepresented?
Right.
Or is there something else going on?
Yeah, something more complicated.
Something more troubling?
Yeah. It's a tough question that requires us to think carefully about the evidence.
We have to grapple with the ambiguities and contradictions.
And ultimately, it's a question that each listener has to answer on their own.
Absolutely. We're not here to tell you what to think.
Right. We're just here to provide a framework for understanding.
Exactly. To understand the complexities of this story.
Right.
And the potential problems of unchecked power and influence.
We've been piecing this puzzle together.
Right.
And the more pieces we put in place, the clearer the picture gets. But the more unsettling it also gets.
It really is kind of unsettling.
Yeah, we started off thinking about Chris Butler as a renunciate.
Right.
You know, the spiritual guy who turned away from money.
Yeah. Simple living.
Right. But as we looked into it more, we found these allegations about all these businesses.
Yeah, all these businesses.
Financial pressure on followers.
Lots of financial pressure.
And maybe even links to exploitation.
And it really challenges how we think about spiritual leaders.
Right.
We usually think of spirituality as detachment from the world, a focus on peace and being good.
Right.
But this CHRISCON thing suggests that those ideas can be twisted to serve someone's own goals.
It makes you think.
It does.
That even in a place that's supposed to be about spiritual growth, you can still find exploitation.
Yeah, abuse of power.
That's one of the big things we've learned.
It is.
We need to think critically.
Oh, wait.
Even about faith and spirituality.
Yes, just because someone looks like a renunciate or a guru.
That doesn't mean they're immune to messing up.
Exactly. Everyone makes mistakes.
Because we got to look beyond the surface.
Yes.
And question what we believe.
And be open to hearing different sides of the story.
And that's important now more than ever.
It is.
Because there's so much information out there.
So much information.
But it's easy to manipulate it.
It really is.
We see all these messages and images trying to change what we think and what we do.
So how do we figure out what's true?
Yeah, what's real?
How do we separate the good from the bad?
It's not easy.
No, but it starts with realizing that power is everywhere. In every relationship, in every group. If we see how power works, we can protect ourselves.
So we should ask questions.
Lots of questions.
Look at things from different angles and be ready to change our minds.
Absolutely.
And remember, there are no easy answers.
No.
The world's messy.
Very messy.
And people's reasons for doing things are complicated.
Very complicated.
So as we finish up this look at Chris Butler and the Science of Identity Foundation, what's the big takeaway for our listeners?
I think it's be careful.
Okay.
Be critical thinkers and watch out for manipulation.
Yeah.
Even in places that seem safe.
Right.
Like spiritual groups.
Yeah.
Power can be sneaky.
Right.
What you see might not be the truth.
Yeah.
And even people who say they've given up everything might still want power and stuff.
It reminds us that we never stop learning.
That's right.
We always need to question things.
Ask questions.
Learn more.
Keep learning.
And grow.
Yes, never stop growing.
Most importantly, listen to that voice inside you.
Trust your gut.
Trust your gut.
Yeah.
Don't let anyone else control your thinking.
No.
Think for yourself.
That's great advice. Thanks for being here.
It was my pleasure.
This was a really fascinating deep dive.
It was.
We hope you found it interesting, too.
Yes, I hope so.
And remember, this is just the beginning.
Right.
Keep looking into things.
Keep asking questions.
Ask more questions and keep exploring the world.
Keep diving deeper.
Thanks for listening.